wheels that we're not working on. So in this case I'm doing rear brakes, we're going to chuck the front wheels. And so next we're going to lift up and support make sure you use the proper jacking points and use a jack stand. This one's not touching anyway. Much better. So this is called a hat and drum design. They're disc rear brakes, and they house the parking brake shoes inside. That's why it's called a hat and drum design. It's got a disc brake rotor and sort of like a brake drum hat that holds the parking brake. I'm going to undo the caliper bolts. On this Toyota, they're 17 millimeters, and they're really tight. They come out really tight and they go on really tight, preferably torqued with thread lock, tight. But, they're gonna be the inner ones, the bigger ones. The other ones are just the pins for the brake pads. Two 17 millimeter bolts on this one. It'll always be 2 bolts. They're always very tight. And then when they're both out, I don't like to let the caliper hang down on the weight of on its own weight by the brake line. You can bungee it or set it somewhere. I don't like to let that hang. I like to set it somewhere, and then we're ready to remove the brake rotor. All right. So you can use these threaded holes to push it off if you have the right bolts, but I'm just going to hit it with a hammer. When you hit it with a hammer, be careful not to strike the studs because you'll damage the threads, or the rotor if you're reusing it. Use eye protection when hammering on stuff. That's all it takes is one good confident strike is all it takes. Hat and drum design. These are the parking / emergency brake pad shoes. They still look good. So just needs a cleaning. I think they're self-adjusting. Needs a cleaning, lube, and reassembly with new pads and rotors. So these are Duralast regular rear rotors from AutoZone. They didn't have the Duralast gold rotors, but we got the gold pads, and the fronts are more important anyway. Now, these new rotors, because they're made from steel, they're gonna come coated in basically engine oil, and that's to prevent the surface rust that will pit it and rust it. You must remove this coating of oil with regular soap and water, or else it'll soak into the lining material and basically ruin it. So again, you can just use regular soap, just like washing dishes, I guess. You can feel when it comes off and it's just the bare metal. I don't like to use the parts washer or brake cleaner for this, because I find that regular soap and water does it best. It won't make those squeaky sounds from having a residue off the other type of cleaner that's on it. Doesn't have to be perfect, just knock that off and you're good. Oh, done. We're going to clean this real good and lube it a little bit. Now is the perfect opportunity to clean it, because if you clean it while it's still assembled, you're wasting brake cleaner on parts that are going to be discarded or machined, and also not getting into all the areas. So, sometimes this brake dust can cause noise or discoloration on the wheels. And if you were reusing the rotor, you clean the inside of that too. Lube and just put a little bit on a couple spots. Now is the opportunity to do that. Just as you see fit. Obviously not on the linings, but on anything that will make noise or specifically the star adjuster. The star adjuster is one that I like to hit up a little bit. Alright, good. Then on goes the rotor. Pay special attention to where the kind of push-off holes were. You can still see their marks on here. You can see where they were. So from the looks of it, we had them like, I don't know. You can see that if you put the bolts into the push-off holes, they have a nice solid area to push off with. Alright? And there's supposed to be a rubber plug there that you're supposed to transfer over from the old rotor that no longer has it, so all good though. Now for disassembling the caliper, see how I had the caliper secured with the bungee cord so it doesn't fly around and damage the brake line? Now we're gonna disassemble it and push it back and rebuild it. I generally like to do that with it installed on the rotor. But first, I'm going to push back the piston. Still had a lot of life on the old pad. Okay. Might as well do them all. So This is one of many ways to compress the piston, but you have to be careful. The reason why the special tool is better is because these pistons are made from a real brittle, cheap material. They're designed to put even pressure on the back of the brake pad. Right here, you can see the circle where it was pressing on, and these will crumble and break if you're an animal. So, if you don't have the special tool, sometimes it's better to use a brake pad like this to press them in, because you will crumble that piston and that seal. That's pretty much maxed out, but if you're gonna do it the ghetto way like this, use a brake pad to protect the piston, because it will crumble on you. Alright, which is still okay if it does, but not preferable. So that's pressed back in. We can clean that up a little bit, lube it. Obviously, these are the surfaces that will grab stuff. You don't have to put it here, you can just put it on the brake pad. Okay, now we get this out of the way. Build the caliper bracket. That's the actual caliper. This is the caliper bracket. These are the pins, they need to be lubed. This one's nicely stuck already, which is a major problem with brakes. When they get frozen in like that, they won't slide evenly. When the lube gets eaten up like that, it doesn't slide nicely like that one. It'll cause the brake pad to apply unevenly. That's why you get them marks and triangle brake pads. And we got to replace these shims too. And it's all nasty. Brake jobs are nasty. Alright? Alright. So we have new shims. They're kind of different, which is great. But always make sure that you have the right brake pads, because they will give you the wrong brake pads all the time, and it's a disaster. So always, before you do anything, make sure you get the right brake pads, because they will always give you the wrong ones, and it sucks. Okay, very good. Read the instructions, because sometimes these backing plates are designed not to get any lube on them. They work better without lube, and so forth. Blah blah blah. Alright, and I just gotta fix this nasty shit. And pay attention to which is which, because see, sometimes they're different. That one came out with a little grommet. Put the new one. Don't put too much, because if you put too much, it won't go back in, because it will have pressure. These are the sliding pins. They're very important. It doesn't want to go in nicely because of that grommet situation. See, already they're sliding better than before, which is nice. And these, a little too good maybe. Now, shims, they gotta come off. So sometimes it's a good idea to pay attention to how they go, so you won't be confused when you put the new ones on. Okay? And don't leave them sticking out, because if you leave them sticking out, they will grind and make noise. That one doesn't go there. Does everybody do it thoroughly and properly? No. We slap the pads on, no cleaning, no greasing, no changing nothing. But hey, to each his own. That one doesn't go there. Indicators, who needs indicators? We don't. We got a winner. So, just like that. Make sure it sits all the way down. Okay. Boom. The other side will be easier because just all the right ones will be left over. There, now it's ready. So what we do now is remember, the little bolts are the pin bolts. The big ones are for the caliper. So we're gonna put some thread locker on them for safety. Thread locker. Put thread locker on it. It's red. Oh well. That's good enough. And then we install the caliper bracket. Make sure you get them started by hand before you go cranking on them. Find the holes, wiggle it, and get it started by hand. Several turns. Okay. Now we're going to tighten them before we forget, and while they're easier to get to. So first I'm going to crank it with the smaller ratchet, as tight as I can. Okay, and then we'll get the breaker bar to really tighten it. So me being a strong guy and using a breaker bar, that should be good. Obviously don't want to break it, but you definitely don't want to come in loose. Disclaimer, use manufacturer's specific torque specs, like everybody does in a brand new car dealership. Experience will tell you when it feels right. Okay, so now we put the brake pads on and then the caliper. So the brake pads, sometimes the inside one and the outside one, they'll be different. In this case, it seems to be identical, so I like that. I'm just gonna put a little something right here. And right here to prevent noise and binding. Not too much, and definitely not on the linings. And now we're gonna carefully seat it into where it goes in the caliper bracket and the shims. Sometimes this can be a pain in the butt. Even though it's a simple job, sometimes it can be a pain in the butt because of the new shims are more difficult to work with than the old shims that are worn into shape. I'll do the inside one too. Alright. It's an easy thing, but I can't tell you how many times I've got one come back that somebody else worked on and is making noise. Why? Because they're too cool for school and they think this is too easy to pay attention to. And they blame it on something else. So now we put the caliper on. So what I like to do is I like to press in the sliding pins so that it can go on. And at this point, if it doesn't go on for you, it's because you did not compress the piston enough. But it's on. Now we can put these pins on. I don't know that I would put thread lock on this because they don't go very tight because they rotate with the pins. Okay, if you look up the torque specs, the caliper bracket bolts go very tight, but the sliding pin bolts do not. Nonetheless, they must be safely and securely tightened. I like to crank them pretty good myself. Alright, so now I use the impact to get them off. And now you can't get to them with the impact now that they're installed, which is one of the reasons I took them apart the way I did. So now we're just going to get a 14mm wrench to tighten them. And I can almost promise you that this here is going to spin before I can get it as tight as I want. So I'm going to get another wrench to hold that with. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. Here I got a ratcheting 14 and a slim adjustable wrench to hold the other one. That's good. You can try to tighten it to see if it doesn't spin. Sometimes you get lucky if it's not spinning, so I can actually crank it down the way I want. These will break if you over tighten them. So at this point we're done. What I like to do is make sure that it floats like that. If you did a proper job, you'll have movement on the caliper like that, floating on the pins that are looped. Sometimes it won't, but if you know you did it right. Another thing I like to do at this point is I like to rotate it and clean it, because all that touching on with dirty hands. This time I am using brake cleaner, but hey, rotate it so that all that, any grease or fingerprints, whatever. And now is a good time to bleed it, assuming that you did it in order of the order that it wants to get bled, which this is the farthest away from the master cylinder. Now is a good time to bleed it because you can actually get to it. So that's what we're going to do next. Bleed it. And we're going to put the wheel back on. You can have a clue on the inside of the wheel to see if there are any brake fluid leaks or axle leaks. This of course doesn't have an axle back here, but and that's it. We just put the wheel on just the same way we took it off, and then we lower the vehicle move to another side or another axle. Lift it very high, that's for sure. Now these are lug-centric wheels. So you got these cone-shaped lug nuts that actually center the wheel instead of the hub-centric. So it'll float around, and I recommend you don't tighten it until all the lug nuts are centered and hand started several threads, because they'll get caught on the edge of the seat there, and tighten the wheel all crooked and strip things up. You'll be wondering what happened. So I'm going to take by hand. I'm going to make sure once one of them sits down, centered, the other ones don't have a choice really. And you can run them in. See, it's being centered by the lug nut. Alright? Now, the torque spec for this is probably something like 80. So you don't have to go 8 on it. Just enough to sit it down. And then you torque it by hand to spec. Don't forget to torque it, but don't over tighten it, because that's stupid.